change the mic?
Yes, we did.
What was I doing wrong?
Nothing. Change the mic.
Is that better? Would you rather me shout at you or use the microphone? Okay, how's that? So, got my PhD at the University of Illinois and learned how to do research, learned how to study couples, learned how to collect data from couples, learned how to do couples therapy. Got really interested in the idea that many couples who are distressed never actually seek therapy, which is interesting. So I was really interested why people who are so happy at the beginning of their relationships, end their relationship. We know the divorce rate is around 45%, even still in the United States. And so I became interested not only in the therapeutic side of things and conducting research, but specifically conducting longitudinal research that would help us to understand how relationships change. Not how do you take an unhappy couple who shows up at your door seeking therapy, how to help them become happier, but how to help people who are already happier at the very beginning of their relationship sustain that happiness. Maybe we don't need to do anything at all, right? But maybe if they have a certain degree of risk or if there's certain problems that are starting to become evident, how can we anticipate those, understand those, and prevent problems from happening? So that's what I do. I conduct longitudinal research on couples, and I also test programs and interventions designed to prevent relationship distress. And you'll hear a lot about my work as we go through the class. So it turns out there are also 3 honor sections associated with this class, and I indicated this in the email that I sent to you. I think it was Sunday night. And these are called 189s, and they're offered Wednesdays at 12 o'clock, 2 o'clock, and 3 o'clock. They usually accommodate 12 to 15 students. So these are small group meetings. They're intended to be discussions. There will be readings. I'll give you readings each week, and we will talk about interesting issues, really specific issues that are happening in the field, usually involving something closer to primary sources more than the text does. These will meet in Franz Hall 2268, which is right across the hall from my office, it turns out. So second floor, the middle building of Franz Hall. If you're interested in these classes, and I know a number of you have already contacted me, maybe about 15 of you have already contacted me, 15 or 20. The priority for these sections goes to students who are in the honors college, but I almost always have extra space. So if you can accommodate one of those times, and you're interested in a once a week, an hour a week opportunity to just come and talk about research, talk about current issues relating to relationships, send me an email, okay? The details on how to do that are in the syllabus, but basically you just need to send me an email, let me know if you're in the honors college or not, and also let me know which of those times would work for you. The more times you list, obviously, the greater the chances are that I can get you into one of those sections. But I really want to fill those out. I really want you to be in those. What we're going to do in these sections, this is the first time I've ever done this. I've done these sections before. But for the first time, what I'm going to do is orient them around one theme. And the theme is going to be in contrast to what we talk about in here, which is mostly going to be universal principles of human intimacy and connection. That's what we're going to talk about in here. Like, how does it work in general for most people most of the time? In our discussion sections, we're going to look at alternatives to the universal model. So we're going to look at what happens when you take an intimate connection and move it into a different culture. What happens when you take an intimate connection but one of those individuals has some sort of condition that changes their emotional availability in some significant way. What happens if you take two partners who happen to come from different cultures and live in Los Angeles? What's that about? How does that work? What happens when you take people who have different ages, different backgrounds, different cultural awarenesses, different beliefs? So we're going to look at alternative, or what if we'll talk plenty about that in this class, but what are sort of the nuances and subtleties involved in gay and lesbian relationships? How does that change our understanding of intimacy? So we'll sort of go down some more specific avenues. So if you're interested in delving into the diversity side, send me an email and I'll do my absolute best to get you connected with that material. Any questions about that? Logistics of the course? Yeah, over here. How are the discussions graded? Good point. Leniently would be one word. This is, look, I get it. You go to a school with, what are there, like 100,000 of you at UCLA? I get it. It's a big school. This is an opportunity to come together in a group of 12 or 15 and have interesting conversations. That's the main agenda. Most people do really well in these seminars. So what's the final product? I'm not exactly sure. Might be like a PowerPoint slide package that you put together but don't actually present. Might be a very short paper. It might be something like that. I haven't thought that all the way through. But it's not going to be difficult, is the important thing. What I need you to do is be challenged a little bit. I want to see you sort of develop in a new way. But the idea is to have an inviting setting where we talk about interesting things. I should also say, thanks for that question, by the way, with regard to the sections, we're not going to start until week 2, okay? Because I have to get PTEs out to all of you. So try to, if you are interested, and I know a bunch of you have already contacted me, and that's great. I think I responded to everybody. If you haven't contacted me and you're still interested, send me that email. Try to do it sooner rather than later. What that'll allow me to do is get a PTE out to you and everybody else. It will also allow me to get the readings out to you. But we won't start meeting until week 2. Okay? So other questions? That was a good one. About the class, not just the sections? Okay, great. So what are we going to do? What are we going to talk about in our 10 weeks together? Well, I want to talk about these issues today. And they're covered more or less in the textbook as well. So I'm starting to track the textbook for you. And if you've looked at chapter 1, much of what I'm about to say will start to seem familiar to you. I'm going to talk about why should we care? Of all the things we should care about, of all the things that you should invest energy in, of all the things that someone like me should study, of all the things our government should devote funds to, why should we think about families and relationships and human connection? Why is that worthy of our attention? From there, I want to go in and talk briefly about elements of this, what I think are central defining experiences of our intimate relationships. From there, I'm going to move on to talk about what an intimate relationship is. How do we, from a definitional point of view, we have to sort of cover that ground. In your own relationships, you've probably been asking your partner this question, like, is this a relationship? Is this a thing? Well, we're going to talk about that in this class, and that will definitely enable you to have more productive conversations over the weekend. And then I want to start hinting at this question of why do relationships form, develop, change, and sometimes deteriorate in the way that they do? What's the psychology behind how relationships develop and change? What determines the course and the quality of our human connections? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about why relationships are important, okay? And I'm going to give you two kinds of reasons. One kind of reason is what I'm going to call an intrinsic reason. It's something that is inherent to relationships themselves. It's sort of often typically built in to the very essence of our relationships. So for example, intimate relationships matter because most of us are the product of intimate relationships. I dare say all of us are the product of intimate relationships. That has to matter, right? The people we are today reflect the fact that two other people got together at some point, had sex, and produced and nurtured probably you. Okay? That's worth knowing about, I think. Intimate relationships are a universal human experience. Anywhere you go on the planet, you can understand what people are about if you understand the power of family, the power of relationships, the power of a social bond, right? So part of what makes us human as a group of people anywhere in the world is this capacity that we have for relating to other people. Another intrinsic characteristic of our intimate relationships is that they expand our range of emotion, right? So, did anybody get engaged over the break? Tell us about that. Do you mind sharing a little? All right. So tell us about what happened. By the way, what's your name? Charlie. Charlie's going to tell us about the best break that anybody in this room probably had.
My fiance and I have been together for about 6.5 years. And I'm 27, she's 31. Although I'm still in school, I made the decision that I wanted to show a sign of commitment to her after being together for so long. And asked her father and had a ring and proposed.
Charlie's been with his partner for 6-7 years. As a show, I'm just repeating what he said. As a show of his commitment to his partner, proposed to her over the break. And talked to his partner's father, and did it the old-fashioned way, old school. And now, I imagine this is a great moment in your life, and in your partner's life, and in your family's life. Relationships are so powerful. They bring out really strong emotions. They make us feel differently than we ordinarily feel. And that is awesome, right? So we want to understand relationships because not only do we engage in them, but they bring out something grand in us. It's something really worth celebrating. It's something that we have a capacity for, and it allows two people to be stronger as a unit than the sum of their parts. That's amazing, right? Now, at the same time, and this is a question I'm not going to ask, who broke up with their partner over this last break? You don't have to disclose. But relationships don't just take us into the realm that Charlie just talked about. They take us into the full range of emotional experiences, right? Relationships are difficult. They're frustrating. Our partners can be so annoying. God, that can be so terrible when you're in the middle of it, right? And so it's not just that they're so wonderful, and they are, but that they're complex, right? There's nuances to that emotion. Some of what we read about in the paper about how people treat their intimate partners is heartbreaking, right? And so anything that is so central to our emotional experiences as human beings, both in the positive way, but also sometimes in the negative way, I think really deserves our attention. And those are a set of intrinsic reasons why we will spend 10 weeks on human connection and human closeness. But intimate relationships also matter for a really different kind of reason. It's not just that there's something intrinsic, something emotionally intrinsic, something fundamentally basic about our relationships, but that they take us to another place. They solve other problems. They have implications beyond us and beyond our relationships, right? They take us to another realm. In this sense, they matter because they promote our mental and physical health, right? Relationships are powerful because when you are in a relationship with another person, you benefit from having another person looking after you. You benefit from having a person who, yes, it's annoying when they nag you to take your vitamins, but it's out of love that they do that, right? So we benefit in all kinds of ways. People who are in better relationships, people who are, I should say, in relationships in general, and in better relationships in particular, tend to enjoy better mental health, better physical health than people who aren't in relationships or people who are in relationships where they're struggling some, right? That doesn't mean that everybody who's in a relationship is healthier than everybody who's not in a relationship. That's not true. Doesn't mean that everybody who's in a great relationship is healthier than everybody who's in a struggling relationship. That's not true. But on average, when we look at averages, this is one of the most robust and widely replicated phenomena, is that our relationships are good for us. They help us stave off depression. They give us a sort of a place, an island, a sanctuary to come to feel good about ourselves and to nurture ourselves and, in turn, provide us with the opportunity of nurturing and comforting somebody else. Another intrinsic reason that relationships matter so much is that they promote the well-being of children. Good relationships tend to promote the development of dependent youth. So to the extent that we as humans take many, many years to become autonomous, fully fledged individuals, and to the extent that we need support and guidance and a roof over our head and protection and food, and we need a provider, we need a caregiver, having a caregiver who is under less stress and has more resources available to them generally promotes a more stable sort of situation. Now, that doesn't mean that single moms and single dads can't do a fantastic job raising kids. Absolutely the case that they can. We know that. Again, we're talking about averages, and on average, being in a relationship helps nurture the well-being of kids. A third and final extrinsic reason that relationships matter is that they're the fabric of society. People who are in relationships are stable. They tend to stay in one place. They tend to pay their taxes. They tend to vote. They tend to take fewer drugs. They tend to commit fewer crimes. And those are all good things. There are many spin-off benefits that come from having societies where relationships are stable and thriving, regardless of the constituents, regardless of who the people are in the relationship. If their bond is strong, that's good for all of us. It's good for our kids, it's good for our own mental health, it's good for our societies broadly. It's actually why our government has invested a fair amount of money in trying to promote the well-being of couples and families in particular. Okay, so those are some intrinsic and extrinsic reasons why we should think about and care about and study and invest in relationships. Now I want to talk a little bit about the central defining experience of intimacy. And we talked about it a little bit when Charlie told us about his engagement, that there is sort of an elevation that comes. There's a sense that we can be brought to a higher level as a result of another person being committed to us and caring about us and thinking about us and us doing likewise for another person. Now, this is a quote from Liu Xiaobo to his, I believe, wife, Liu Jia. Does anybody know the story of Liu Xiaobo? He won a Nobel Prize. He is a political prisoner in China, and he was one of only 2 people to win the Nobel Prize in absentia and not be able to accept it because he was imprisoned in China, and where he remains. And I love this picture of them because they look identical. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? As though she has really tried to look like him, I think is how I think about that. And here is one of the notes that he wrote to her. He said, "Your love is sunlight that transcends prison walls and bars, stroking every inch of my skin, warming my every cell, letting me maintain my inner calm, magnanimous and bright, so that every minute in prison is full of meaning." That's what her love does to him. That's powerful. But my love for you, it's only guilt and regret. I'm sort of not even worthy of all that you give to me, sometimes heavy enough to hobble my steps. My guilt and regret is so overwhelming, I somehow feel inadequate for what I'm able to provide you, because he's in prison, right? And yet, my love is hard, sharp, and can penetrate any obstacles. Even if I am crushed into powder, I will embrace you with the ashes. Wow, that's awesome. That is powerful, right? And we have to think about that as potential. That Charlie can get there, we can all get there. This is all possible for all of us. Isn't that great to think? I mean, not prison. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. This experience of another person being so valuable to them, and them being so humbled by the affection and the power that this other loved individual holds over them. That's great. This doesn't cost money. It doesn't come in a pill. You can't really do a lot to make it happen to you. But it's a capacity that exists within all of us. And this is the central defining experience, is this capacity that we have to reach out to another person and connect to them. And the issue isn't just how to think about that in the most exquisite moments, and I think of this as an exquisite moment, but how can we make that part of our lives if we choose to? How can we make this part of our existence if we want to? That's not to say that people can't become exalted simply on their own. Certainly they do. That's not to say that people should always be in a relationship all of the time. That's not the case. There are other ways of being successful and wonderful and terrific. I'm just saying that this is one that works for a lot of people a lot of the time. And it therefore requires our deep understanding of how we can create it and how we can perpetuate it. So that's why relationships are important, I think. This is really just the tip of the iceberg, the intrinsic and extrinsic reasons why I think we should pay attention. It's what I think of as the central defining experience. Let's talk a little bit from a definitional perspective of what makes a relationship intimate. And again, you will see this in the textbook. Relationships, so now we need to distinguish between relationships in general and relationships that are intimate. So how do we distinguish? How do we sort of draw some borderlines? How do we have definitional criteria for what it is that I want to talk about, which is human intimacy? At what point do we sort of draw a line and say that's an intimate relationship and that one's not? Well, it turns out the lines are not crystal clear. That's not atypical in the social sciences. And yet we can still identify some guidelines, some criteria that help us to say, yeah, that's what we're talking about. So, and I'm using some jargon here, bi-directional interdependence. We are connected. You do stuff and it affects me. I do stuff and it affects you. Bi-directional interdependence. So if you're in an intimate relationship and your partner's in a grouchy mood, that affects you. You're going to notice that. Your partner gets an internship offer to move to Jacksonville, Florida, well, guess what? That affects you. And if something happens to you, if you hurt yourself, if you're struggling with something at school, if you're having a difficult situation with your family, that affects your partner. Bi-directional interdependence. If it only goes one way, it's not so much a relationship. And the connections are really extensive. So one of the first criteria that we think of really for any relationship at all, not just an intimate relationship, is that it's bi-directional, that I affect you and you affect me. It's true of my parents. It's probably true of your relationship with your parent or parents. It's true of your relationship with your grandparents, aunts and uncles, siblings, even friends, right? So this isn't just about intimate relationships. It's a defining criterion for relationships in general. A second criterion is that the two people who are affecting each other recognize one another as a unique person. So this is different from your relationship with your mailman. Okay? This is different from someone who fulfills a societal role. Chances are, even though you may have a relationship with your physician, that you're mutually interdependent for brief moments when you go see your physician, and that person has a responsibility for you, and you go and see them and tell them things, sort of a kind of an interdependence. That person is really a doctor. They adopt the role of doctor. And you could get another doctor and probably get good care from that person. But your mother is your mother, right? Your partner is a unique person. Your sibling is a unique person. And so now we have to think of a mutual recognition within that interdependent dyad. And dyad means two people, and sometimes I'll use that word. Within that unit that you form, you recognize, it would be, excuse me, really hard to replace you. Like, I could do it, but I notice it, right? So that's the specialness and the uniqueness that we sort of assign to other people. And it's one of the criteria of relationships in general, but it's also a criterion of intimate relationships in particular. Relationships are also distinguished by effects that are strong, frequent, and diverse. So a moment ago I gave an example of your relationship with a doctor. Relationship with your doctor, not very frequent, right? You might go for a checkup, you might go to see your dentist, it happens, there's an interdependence there, but it's a very weak kind of interdependence. It's not very diverse either. It's just that one thing that you go to your doctor for, right? It's just that one thing you go to your hygienist for. When we're in a relationship with our parents, with our siblings, with friends, with a roommate, that interdependence, the connection, the influence that we have over each other tends to be real and strong and salient. It's frequent, usually, not always. Sometimes we have long-distance relationships, and that changes the frequency. But it can still be a strong influence, even though we're far apart physically. So we have an interdependence that it's intense. You feel it, right? And it happens often. It's present, where it's salient. We notice it. And it also extends into different domains, right? So part of a relationship is that there is an interdependence that goes across different domains of your life, right? So this is a place where you get emotional support from your partner. This is a place where you might get practical support from a roommate. This may be a place where you have a kind of coordination with another person that really isn't just segmented into one area. It's not just going to see your barista and you get a cup of coffee. It's not just going to see your hygienist and you get flossed. It's encompassing, right? Relationships encompass a lot of who we are as an individual. And now we have to talk about one of the fuzzier distinctions, and it's the idea that one of those domains, and one of the domains that really trips us now out of the realm of grandparents, out of the realm of aunts and uncles, cousins, roommates, into a totally different realm, totally different domain, and that's that there's sexual desire, that there's lustfulness. That's what's great about relationships, right? That's what makes intimate relationships different from every other relationship, usually. Again, these are gray areas. But the thing that really puts it over the top is that there is lust and sexual desire that could be possibly, potentially expressed and shared. Okay? Doesn't mean at the very start of a relationship that the absence of sexuality means that there's no intimacy. That's not the case. You can have real high levels of intimacy without sexuality. That's absolutely true. But ultimately, for a relationship to be an intimate one, it has to have the potential for the expression of lust and sexual desire. Okay? So that's what distinguishes relationships from interpersonal encounters that we might not think of as relationships. And that's what distinguishes relationships that are more intimate from those that are less intimate. Okay? So I want you to know that. You'll see this on the first exam, guaranteed. Okay. So that's how social scientists tend to think about what really matters in relationships and what a relationship is. But there are other things that, if I were to just ask you spontaneously, what else happens in a good relationship? These are some of the answers that you might come up with. Well, we sort of work around each other. Like my girlfriend, I don't have a girlfriend. I'm married. So when I say this, I'm not disclosing anything I shouldn't be disclosing. But if I had a girlfriend, we would coordinate behaviors. So she works late on campus on Tuesdays. So I stick around. I work at the library. I just decide to study late at the library that day, so that then I can walk her back to her apartment. It's safer. So we coordinate our behaviors. We sort of make an active effort to, you do this, I do that. We'll try to spend some time together. When we are apart, we try to get back together. Right? We try to get closer to each other, whenever we can. Maybe that's a phone call. Maybe it's a text message. Maybe it's a picture on your phone of your partner. But proximity, psychological or physical, is a big part of how we sort of convey that interdependence, right? Partners take care of each other. So usually in a relationship, when we think about a relationship, we think about if one person's struggling, the other person doesn't try to pile on more stress, right? They try to help them feel better, usually. Partners try to be fair. They try to achieve equity. So often, a lot of conflict in relationships, especially established committed partnerships, are over who's doing what in the relationship. This doesn't feel fair. It seems like I'm doing everything in this relationship. Why do I always have to be the one who does X? It turns out there are good psychological reasons for those arguments. One of them is that we're really paying attention to what we're doing and not paying really close attention to what our partner's doing, and they're doing the opposite. So those tend to be common conflicts. Partners reveal and share something of themselves, right? So part of what we're doing in our relationships is saying, here's what I'm about. Here's what I'm going through. Here's who I am. And I want to know who you are. I want to understand what you're about and what's going on with you. Partners usually think about a future together, right? That wasn't so evident in the definition of an intimate relationship that I just gave you. But usually when we're thinking about being on that pathway toward a more committed partnership, we're thinking about, gee, this isn't just a one-time thing. This isn't just going to end when the quarter ends. This has the potential, if we both think it's going to work, to persist into the future. So, does anybody see a problem? with those criteria, with these other characteristics, yeah.
It almost seems like it's hard to have your own individual identity.
You lose your identity, maybe, right? So that's difficult. Part of what happens in relationships is you give over part of yourself to another person, and they're doing the same thing. And that can be fraught with real issues. That can really be a challenge for people, right? Especially if you're not at that stage in your life where you want to be doing that. Yeah?
Shouldn't that be an expansion of your identity? And expanding to become something greater than, or a greater extension?
So the point is, on one hand, if you're merging, joining up with another person, it might feel like you're giving something up. It might feel like, gee, where am I in all this? But another way it can go is to say, wow, I really am expanding. I'm in a place where I can develop and grow new potential, new capacity, do new things. I can do things that I wasn't able to do on my own. So it can go either way. And we're going to find out in this class how that gets sorted out. What other problems do you see from this list? What other issues does this provoke for you? One of them is relationships have two people. And if I say, I want my partner to take care of me. I'm feeling I've been struggling lately. I got all this stuff going on at work, and the kids are getting to me, and, I'm not feeling so good, and I'm not, that one project that I was working on at work didn't go through. I'm not where I need to be. My partner, good partner that he or she might be, says, well, let me jump in, let me help out. And then I say, that wasn't the help I wanted. That's not what I needed. I needed help, but why couldn't you be more sensitive? Why couldn't you be more understanding? You're trying to help me in the way that you would want to be helped, but I'm not you. Why didn't you help me the way I wanted to be helped? Right? So the complexities are that for every one of these dimensions, you and your partner or prospective partner might not agree. Relationships are hard. Getting to that quintessential experience can take work. There's a minefield that you sometimes have to go through. You have to pay attention to these dynamics in your relationship if you want to achieve the good stuff that can come from them. And that's interesting, right? So on one hand, relationships have this potential to be really rewarding, really fulfilling, really self-expanding, right? On the other hand, what do we know? Divorce rate, 45%. The most common reason why anyone seeks any sort of professional counseling in the United States is for relationship issues, right? So we know that's hard. Not always for everybody all the time. I'm not saying that. But there are moments in our relationships, and sometimes those moments can accumulate to define the relationship where we're just not, the gears aren't meshing, right? It's hard. So intimate relationships are certainly important. They certainly have great potential, but they're difficult sometimes for some people. And at the same time, we live in a context where fewer and fewer and fewer people have long-term, stable, committed partnerships. And when they do, they're often outside of conventional societal institutions, right? So it's interesting that over a long period of historical time, that the marriage rates in the United States, for example, are probably at an all-time low. So a lot of the structures, the societal structures that people have historically relied upon to absorb to provide structure when the relationship itself was struggling, those are falling away. Okay? So we'll talk about that a little bit in this class. This isn't so much about demography, this class, and long-term historical change. We'll get into that a little bit in the 189 section. But we do have to acknowledge that the relationships that you have today are going to be very different from the relationships your parents had 22 years ago. So now let's ask the question, what do we need to know? Of all the things that we could know, how do we focus our interest in this course? What should we focus on? What do we know to, look at all these people on the left side. What would we need to know to really feel like we understood their relationship? What would we need to know in order to determine whether or not that relationship's going to go down the direction of growth and enabling and expansion versus, hey, wait a minute, you're stepping on my toes, get out of my life, get out of my face. Like, how do we know which way it's going to go, right? How do we understand how their relationship is going to change? One of the most amazing things of relationships is that they change. And part of what we have to do as smart relationship partners is keep up with that change. And part of what we have to do as smart relationship scientists is try to make sense of that change, and if we can, try to predict it. And how will we help them when times get rough? How can we use knowledge, real information about relationships to promote the welfare of relationships, right? So that's what this class is going to be about. It's really going to be about answering a central question, what I think of as our key question, which is, how is it, not just that relationships are so good and then there's also some difficulties associated with it, but how is it that relationships, almost by definition, not always, but almost by definition, begin with this strong sense of powerful emotion, right? And where does that go? You know, does anybody know, besides Charlie, is anybody planning a wedding? How much is the average wedding? Say again? $24,000. How much is your tuition? That's a lot of cash, right? So how is it that we, that's the average, by the way. How is it that we throw a party that one day for $24,000 on average, stand up in front of our closest friends, our family members, vow to stay together with this person through sickness and health, and then 45% of the time end up going off the rails? How does that happen? Right? That's the question we want to address in this class. How does that connection that we form change over time? And donations will be taken for that wedding and any other wedding in this class right after a lecture today. So here is one couple. Here's the results of one couple that participated in my one of my research studies many years ago. What I do is I go out and get newlywed couples, and I get them through marriage licenses, which are often publicly available documents. And you can send people letters and say, I'd like you to be in a study. And you can then worry about how representative are the people who come your way, etc. But in this study, you see two lines. And you see on the x-axis there on the bottom, the days since their wedding. And I try to get them as close to their wedding as possible. You can see that our first session with them was maybe 110 days after their wedding. So 3 or 4 months into their marriage. And the blue line is the husband. The red line is the wife. The y-axis is a standard questionnaire that they use where I ask them, how happy are you in your relationship? How's it going? And we might think of that as a satisfaction or a rough index of intimacy, connection, whatever. And what do you notice in these two lines? Yeah. This guy is happier than his wife. Good. What else do you notice?
Kind of follow each other.
They're tracking. You can imagine two lines that seem random. They're in the same relationship, it seems like. What else?
She seems to have steeper drops than he does.
Her rate of change is so fast, sorry, that she gets the lowest possible score 1,500 days into the marriage. You see that bottom point there? That's a 6. That is a score of 1 on all 6 items. That is not a relationship you want to be in. What else do you see? They don't start off that high. That's kind of interesting, huh? You can imagine, and most people, by the way, are above 40. So there's some, automatically, we can see right off the bat, some interesting things. They start off a little low. They're bumping around a lot, right? There's also, we might think of as a little turbulence along the way. And then they drop off, as you heard. So every relationship has something like this going on. It's not always a decline. It's definitely not always a decline. And for Charlie, I'm certain it's not going to be a decline. It's not even on the table. Most people, in fact, we'll see graphs in the next couple weeks that are just straight across the top. People tend to do okay, but not everyone does okay. So we have to ask the question, what differentiates this couple that's really struggling from a couple that is stably happy? What do they got going on? What's going on? Why? Is it just communication? That's what we would all think. Maybe it's their personalities. Maybe it's how much stress they're dealing with. Maybe it's how great their jobs are. We have to understand that question. We have to understand that variability. We also have to understand what changed. You see these yellow dots here at the end? Guess what happened after that first yellow dot? Children. They discovered after that first dot, that was the arrival of kids between the first yellow dot and the second yellow dot. For him, hey, things are better. For her, it's like, oh my God, I'm doing all the work here, right? So they had a child. So maybe big life events come and sort of insert themselves into our lives. And we have to understand, how does that happen? How does does the neighborhood that we live in, how do our jobs affect the lives that we lead? The other interesting thing about this couple, they had a baby boy at that time. So, and that really precipitated what appears to be a crisis in an already struggling relationship. But we're really interested in this couple, and we have to understand what's going on. What is happening between these people? What's going on in their daily lives that help us to know why they're not higher in satisfaction, why they're struggling so much, so that if we did want to intervene, we'd have a strategy. But what's also interesting is that this couple stayed together for 6 more years. And that's when I stopped studying them. I ran out of grant support at that point. They stayed together. They didn't divorce. They stayed together for 6 more years. Now, you might say, wow, that's crazy. Or maybe you say, wow, that's admirable how they managed to stick it out. You might say, oh, I feel for that child, right? Because when we think about those extrinsic consequences of relationships that I just talked about, and the effects of the parents' relationship on the kids, this was a child who was exposed to 6 years, and I know, 6 years of distress. Because when I did check in with them 10 years later, they weren't that much happier than they are at that very last time point. So we really have to understand what's going on in this couple and lots of different couples that leads them to have these bumps, to have these different levels, and to have these different slopes. So let me just leave you with a few more ideas. So this course is about understanding what's going on in that couple's daily life and in all couples' daily lives so that we can understand and develop an answer to this critical question. Why did they pick each other? What were they missing? Where did they end up struggling? And in order to answer this critical question, the centrally most important question, why do relationships start off so optimistically and then change over time? Why does that happen? And we're going to approach that question and the questions that I've outlined through these chapters. We're going to talk about attraction and mate selection. How did that couple even get together? What was the nature of their sexual relationship? How did that go? Is there something about men and women that makes relationships fundamentally difficult to manage? What is it about their personalities and their personal histories that might have affected their relationship? how do they communicate or fail to communicate or fail to maintain their relationship? What are they arguing about? How much do they disagree, and how do they sort of approach one another in the context of conflict? What are their beliefs about relationships? Maybe they stayed in their relationship because they had values that said, no, you never leave a relationship that struggles this much. Do you remember Hillary Clinton was famously said that she wasn't going to leave Bill Clinton even after he had an affair in the White House, right? She stuck around with him. What's that about? That's a belief about how you arrange yourself in relation to your relationships. How do they understand what they're talking about? Maybe they misunderstand each other in some fundamental way. Maybe they're under an amazing amount of stress. And then we have to think about what we would do to help them and how this relationship is going to change across the lifespan. On Thursday, we will talk about the research methods that we need to answer those questions. So I will see you Thursday.